Hello guys, my name is Andrew Butenko and you are watching You Asked, I Built. And in this episode of this YouTube show, I will demonstrate on how it is possible to access the principal object access table using virtual entities. Let me start from plugin, and as you may see, I have already created solution and project for plugins, and it contains two plugins, one for retrieve multiple and one for retrieve. In this video I won't implement create, update and delete handlers, so I will end up with two plugins on retrieve and retrieve multiple messages. In order to move forward, I will build the plugin. It was built. I will open plugin registration tool and I will firstly register the assembly. In order to do that, I'm opening the register dropdown and choosing register new assembly. After that, I'm pointing to my assembly and click open. By default, both classes of for plugins are selected, and all that is left is to click register selected plugins. And plugins assembly is registered. On the next step, I will create the data provider. In order to do that, I click here register and choose register new data provider. In the form, I will provide the data provider name. Let's say I will call it POA data provider. Under solution, I will choose the solution that I created before, and it has the name POA. Under data source entity dropdown, I will click dropdown and I will choose create new data source. And for the display name, I will choose POA data source. And for plural name, it already provided the plural name for it, POA data sources, and the name of the entity that will be created behind the scenes will be AB_POA data source. I click create. If you will see something like that, don't be scared, you did everything right, and it looks like it's some kind of glitch inside the plugin registration tool. So in order to resolve it, you will have just to kill the plugin registration tool process. It is here, and I choose end task. And I will restart it. I will close. I will choose create a new connection and I will reconnect to my organization. And now, if I will do the same steps, register new data provider, and I will click the drop down here, I will see the POA data source was created behind the scenes. So I will choose it. For data provider name, I will choose again POA data provider. For solution, I choose POA. As assembly, I choose the assembly that I registered on the previous step, and it is what was the name of the assembly? It was POA virtual entity plugins. And for retrieve and retrieve multiple, I will choose retrieve and retrieve multiple plugins. And in order to finish the registration, I will click register. And done. On the next step, I will register virtual entity data source, and it could be done only through the classic administration interface. So once I'm there, I will choose this drop down under settings, and I will go to administration. And under administration, I will choose virtual entity data sources. Once I'm there, I will click new. In the pop-up that appeared, I have the possibility to choose the data provider, and in this drop-down I will choose POA data provider and click OK. And finally done. Now I have to provide data source name. Let's call it POA data source, and save and close. And after POA data source was created, I finally can create the virtual entity. And in order to do it, I will navigate to solutions. I will open solution that I created before. And I can choose new and choose entity. And I can create the entity now. So let's call it POA. And it will be the virtual entity, and under data source I will choose the data source that was created earlier, so it is POA data source. For plural name I will use just POA-s. External name and external collection name are required because this is the virtual entity, but I definitely won't use it, so I can provide any information here. So let's stay consistent and let's use POA and POA-s. I will uncheck mail merge because I won't use it, and primary field is the field that will be by default created in the entity and usually used as a main entity field and main entity label. So let's reuse it for the purpose to show the related object ID. So I will use the display name object ID, and the label and schema name will be object ID as well, and it automatically populated the external name, and it will be object ID. It will let it be business required. And let's leave the single line of text type of the field here. Let's save it. And once entity is created, let's start creating additional fields of this entity. Let's start creating fields. Let's start from the object type field that basically will show the type of the entity to which principal object access record is related to. So it will be object type code, and field requirement, it will be required, and searchable yes, and let's leave object type code as is. We don't need auditing, and let's leave type as is. Save and new. The next field I will create will be related to the principal to which record is shared. It could be either team or user, so I will just call it principal ID, and it will contain the GUID of the user or the team with which particular record is shared. Save and new. Because it could be either team or user, it is required to have the field that will show to which type of the record actually the sharing belongs to. So I create the field principal type code, and it will be again required. I will disable auditing, and I will leave settings of the field as is. Save and close. Sorry, save and new. Once object type code, object ID, principal type code, and principal ID fields are created, I will switch to creation of the other fields that will show what privileges are provided to particular principal for particular record, like read, write, delete, append, assign, and share. Once this configurational work is completed, I can switch to the funniest part that for me is obviously coding. So let me open the Visual Studio with the two plugins that I created earlier, and let me start writing the code for the plugin that will basically make the virtual entity alive. So first things first, I want to get the context that I will use for all my communications with the plugin execution pipeline. And on the next step, I want to get the organization service. And as a parameter, I will use context user ID. In order to see that everything works fine, I don't plan to convert the query expression that arrives to the plugin context and transform it into the query to the principal object access table, but instead of it, I will just query all the available records and show this data on the UCI interface. So I will create the query for principal object access entity in the following way. Query equals new query expression for the object principal object access, and I want to get all the columns, and that's it. On the next step, I will retrieve all the available records. POA records equals service, not service provider, but service dot retrieve multiple query and dot entities dot to list. And on the next step, I will convert this POA records into the our virtual entity record. Var POA results, equals POA records select, and it will be just P, and I will return new entity of AB underline POA schema name, and with the ID of p.id I will pass the ID exactly the same with the same ID that is stored inside the Dataverse. And because virtual entities are super special, I have to provide not only the ID itself but attribute ABPOA ID, and again assign to it p.id. And now, step by step, I will go through all the available attributes. Privileges like read, write, delete, append to, and so on are not stored in the separate field, but those privileges are stored in one field of the in type. And in order to get it, I will use the approach that is called logical multiplication, if I'm not mistaken. So here is how I will get and set AB underline read privilege. That is the very first in our list. And I will do the following: p.get attribute value, and because I told that this is the whole number, I will get it as int, and I will provide the field name that is access writes mask. And in order to get the is it set or no, I will use 1 ampersand, and I will use the following enumeration: access writes dot, and here is the whole list. And in order to get the read privilege, I will use the read access. And the result of this logic operation will be the whole number. And if it is set, it won't be equal to 0. So I will use following approach. So all this operation is not equals to 0. And the result will give me the Boolean value. And in order to get the all remaining fields, I will go one by one and use the similar approach to populate the value for the corresponding privilege field. Once this conversion is completed, I have to pack it somehow and put it to the context. And the container for this kind of operations is entity collection. So in order to move forward, I will declare the variable that I call result, and it will be new entity collection. And I have to pre-populate few options here. So few properties, excuse me. So this is entity name. It will be context dot plugin context primary entity name and the second option that I have to populate is total record count. And in my case, I can just take POA results and take the count of it. And in order to populate all the records that I instantiated over here, I will just call following method: result entities dot add range and POA results. And in order to set the possible multiple enumeration. Okay, if you don't like it, I will just convert it to list. And that's it. And in order to return the result to the user interface, what I will do, I will just call following code: context, output parameters, and business entity collection equals to result. So now I will just build succeeded, and I will update the plugins assembly. Update, I will choose the assembly, and I will click open. I will select all the plugins and assembly itself, and I will click update selected plugins. And update is completed. So now I can check how it works. In order to check how and if it works, I will just use the interface of the Dataverse. So I will open it, and I will open Advanced Find. Once it's loaded, I will look for POA entity. So POA is here, and I will edit columns, and I will add all of columns that I populate in my code. In order to add columns, after this dialog is popped up, I will choose add columns, and I will select all of columns that are available here, and click OK, and click OK. And let's hit results. And the data is available, so it's possible to see what object with what type of object with what ID to user or to organization or to team was shared with what kind of privileges. On the next step, I plan to extend what is available already in the Retrieve Multiple plugin and include conversion of the query expression that comes into the plugin context and convert it into the query regarding principal object access table. Once the coding is completed, let me build the plugin. Open plugin registration tool and update the plugin assembly. Let me select this and click update selected plugins. Okay, and now let's test it. So this is Advanced Find that shows all the available records. And now let's include filter. Let's say I want to see sharings that were performed against the team. As you may see, filtering works fine. And one thing that is missing at the moment is the read plugin, and I will work on it just right now. Let me open Visual Studio and let me jump into Retrieve plugin. I will copy context and service from the Retrieve Multiple plugin and will just paste it here because I will use it anyway. I include missing references and we're good. So on the first step, I want to retrieve the record that I will retrieve. And in order to get it, I will write following code: var target equals context, and again input parameters, but in this case it will be the target key, and in our case the target is entity reference, so it will contain just the ID and the entity schema name. The interesting thing that I noticed regarding the principal object access table is that retrieve operation doesn't work for it. So in order to retrieve the record, I will have to use again retrieve multiple, but query will be slightly different. Query will be new query by attribute in this case, and again principal object access, and again I will ask for all columns because I will use all of it, and that's it. But in order to get only the record that I want to retrieve, I will add the filter, add attribute value, and in my case it will be principal object access, principal object access ID, and the value for it will be target.id. In order not to rewrite the code, I will use this one from the retrieve multiple handler. So the very first, using the very first code, I will retrieve actually one record. var records record POA record. How do they call it? POA records. Records equals service dot retrieve multiple query and entities, and I can say that's it. Entities, okay, and let be to list. And after that I will use exactly the same conversion as I used here. I will just copy it. So, restoring some missing references and complete it. And the very last step is again to return the entity to the context. In order to do it, I use following code. Context, output parameters, business entity equals POA results dot first. Let's build and let's update. But before testing, let's configure the form. Let me jump back to entity that I created and open forms and open main. And let me place all the fields that I have here: object type code, principal ID, principal type code, and let's put read, write, delete, append, append to, and share. Now let's save it. And let's publish it. Now let me open Advanced Find and let me open one of existing records. And as you may see, the data that is shown in the grid is shown on the form as well. That's it for today. I hope you liked it. Thank you for watching my videos. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to my channel, and see you the next time.